Kwali, Tonali, Piloncillos, I'm Siwa Masat. I'm here today in virtual circle, virtual space, community, to have a chat about a potentially sensitive topic, and that's the topic of gatekeeping within the Indigenous cultures and community. If you are a reconnecting Indigenous person, detribalized, or looking to connect with your roots and your ancestry, or you've been walking this red road, then this is for you. Chances are you may have already encountered this kind of behavior, and if not, you likely will. Gatekeeping is an imposing practice that has permeated many of the spheres in our culture and society. I wanted to attempt to put a dent in this dense topic, and I'm primarily speaking from a broad perspective, my own perspective of Mexica or Mexican Indigenous person's perspective. But this may apply to other Indigenous groups or descents or other sectors of society. I think this is a broader topic, but I'm going to speak specifically to Indigenous culture. So if this is something that interests you, serve yourself some tea. It's a Malinali day, so an herbal infusion. Drink some medicine with me, or light yourself some copal, some rosemary, or any other comforting plantita, hierbita, and just come sit with me and let's dive in. So now before I begin, I wanted to preface that I think it's important to approach these conversations with some love and compassion. There are a lot of reasons why we engage in this behavior, and it's so easy to jump on the bandwagon when it comes to this stuff, and sometimes we are the perpetrator, and that's okay. I think if we can acknowledge it with an open heart and an open perspective, and that can be the first step towards healing and staying open. So I'm not here to push any buttons. I almost said that I'm here to push buttons. I'm not here to push any buttons, only to have a productive conversation and to bring awareness. So yeah, let's do it. I have my script. I wrote a script. So what is gatekeeping in the Indigenous community? Gatekeeping is a practice of imposing certain standards or criteria on others who want to participate in or belong to a certain group. In this context, Indigenous community, it can be based, and this type of gatekeeping can be based on ancestry, blood quantum, tribal enrollment, language, spirituality, and any other aspect of Indigenous identity or interest. And these are particular specific examples that we often encounter in these spheres. When you're first walking in, you're first wanting to explore your identity, you come across you want to find out, okay, well, what group am I from? I know that my grandmother is this, I know that my grandfather is this, or my parents, they come from this region of Mexico, and you're trying to connect with the tribes there, and oftentimes that cultural connection is lost. For me, for example, my family is Mayo Yoeme, and my grandfather was the last to speak the language, which I believe is Uto Aztec, and this is from my own digging, but he was the last to speak the language, and a lot of those connections are lost, so where do you find, how do you dig, how do you find those roots, and I think that topic we can explore on a different video, but I feel like that's where most people begin. And so the first walls that you may encounter, it's like, well, how much are you half Mayo, half this, half that, or what percentage, or what's your how much blood do you have, or what's your cultural connection? And that's where it begins. Okay. It's in the way that we were taught, though, in the US, grew up in the US, and it gets intricately more complex when we explore Mexican culture as well. I think in both of these spaces, regardless, in both spheres, we are fighting a deeply embedded colonized perspective, with the with the sole purpose of erasing Indigenous people and culture. This systemic problem has significant implications for the way that we interact with each other, uh, and perpetuates historical injustices that continue to affect us. You know, like it or not, it's our everyday reality. And so you know that you are treated a certain way, that you don't know things about your culture, where you're from, because of this system, and yet you're fighting people that inadvertently are protecting that system, whether they realize it or not. And this is kind of what this conversation's about, how gatekeepers perpetuate our lack of access, you know, and this colonized way of living, which sounds very spicy. So the practice of gatekeeping Indigenous cultures can stem from a variety of sources depending on the specific context and culture. The primary one, which we've already sort of touched upon, is historical trauma. In many Indigenous communities, like all of them, let's just say almost all of them. I don't think there's that one tribe in Brazil that's untouched, but pretty much everybody's been experienced a long history of colonization, forced assimilation, oppression that have resulted in massive loss of knowledge, tradition, practices, destruction of their art and cultural heritage and inheritance. As a result, many community members, you know, feel a sense of urgency to protect whatever is left, but that within itself ends up, you know, causing further problems, because now we're excluding people that genuinely want to connect, you know, or the opposite. The opposite is where us as people, we've been systemically taught aversion to our own ancestral lineage that results in negation and denial. And if you are a member of Mexican culture or descent, then you know how our own people are racist towards themselves, you know, their own Indigenous background. It's, if you know, you know. It's very, very obvious, you know. And second, another way in which we gatekeep, or people gatekeep, is through spirituality, spiritual beliefs. In some Indigenous cultures, certain knowledge and practices may be considered so sacred that it's only meant to be shared with a specific individuals or groups, usually like born within the family, born within the system. You know, a lot of you know, my experience of Danza Azteca, for example, the people that get taught the continuation, you know, or get taught how, you know, to be capitanes, or get taught the more in-depth stuff, are people that are going to take over. Everybody else is just a body. And I'm sorry if I've offended anyone, but certain knowledges or practice, like I said, are deemed only for the worthy, and or if you've been prepared in a certain way, and that ends up being lost. The more and more, we'll talk about certain things in a second. Next is power dynamics. It leads right into this. That's kind of what I wanted to go into, and that's ego, power dynamics. Gatekeeping can also be used as a means of maintaining power and control within a community. This can include limiting access to knowledge, to resources, in order to maintain that hierarchy and structure, or to prevent anybody from gaining too much influence. The next villain of the next gatekeeper is cultural appropriation, and in this one in particular is of wide concern to a lot of people. Indigenous cultures also have been subject to cultural appropriation The largest example, not Mexica in particular, but that's like the usage of sage. That's been like appropriated all around the world. And, you know, even appropriation is rampant. We know it is. But when it comes to indigenous culture, it's hard because of whatever you have left, you end up fighting so hard to protect that, and that you isolate the people that are your people trying to connect, right? So all of these possible sources, in the context of modernity, which is the world that we live in now, ultimately contribute to further erasure. And this is my argument here. Gatekeeping excludes people that have a genuine passion, a genuine affinity, genuine interest for their cultural heritage, that because they don't meet the criteria by the gatekeepers, end up becoming discouraged and stepping away. There are so many like talented people, that could open up the doors to further educate, people that are looking for their tribes. A lot of these like tribes, whether they're remote and in different areas, or are losing their culture, are losing people to continue. How do you preserve it if it gets so small, or where it's like, oh well, you're not, you don't have enough of that blood, or you didn't grow up here so you can't learn this. One of the things that made me so sad about my particular tribe, for example, the Mayo, is like the deer dancers, there's less and less people learning them, and the dance and the dance is becoming extinct in its own way. And I would love to learn, but also in some tribes, women aren't allowed to dance. And even if let's say if I was allowed, if I showed up and I was like, hey, I'm a lost daughter of your tribe, can I learn? I don't, who knows what kinds of situations. I feel like I'd be cool, but I don't know. I've experienced enough of gatekeeping everywhere else that I don't really know. So this is part of the reality in trying to walk this journey. And some of this exclusionary stuff can look like not being brown enough, or having hair. Having hair is a thing. If you have hair on your arms, you're like, you're not native enough, it's crazy. Last connection to your tribe, or it's unknown, you don't know where you come from. A lot of people know their grandparents spoke an indigenous language, but they don't know which one or where they came from. People get displaced, people get adopted, people migrate. There's 1,000 reasons why people don't know where they're from. And I'm not growing up in a certain region or tradition. The blood quantum, all of these are tools of the oppressor, or certain time requirements. Anyway, gatekeeping also discourages diversity and inclusion, and reinforces stereotypes and prejudices about who can and who cannot claim or express their indigenous identity or descent. This way of thinking pushes a purist ideology standard that simply cannot be met by most. Colonization happened, there's no going back. It happened. And though there are still people out there that are 100% immersed within their culture, the majority are not. I don't know if there's such thing as 100% somebody indigenous person, probably, but it's also possible that it's not. Does that make them less? That, I don't know, that blood quantum stuff is really spooky to me. But should we not pursue our ancestral ways for the sake of modernity, or an outdated fear-based ideology steeped in historical trauma? Are we going to let that stop us? Especially when these ways encourage or prioritize earth stewardship at a time of an existential environmental crisis. You think about that, the majority of indigenous culture is based on being stewards of the earth, taking care of the earth. Right now we need that. We need our people to reconnect. Should we not work on healing this wound through reconnection? That's a question I have. Gatekeeping limits the growth and innovation of Indigenous culture by preventing perspectives, ideas, and experiences from being shared and appreciated. This is especially true when it comes to spirituality or philosophy. We're not, philosophy, spirituality is built on ideas of the past, and that's how we learn and that's how we grow. So if we can't expand or explore those ideas safely without being judged, but that's just people in general, because I feel like that's just a touchy thing for people. you know I think it's important to remember that what we know and what we think we know is all speculatory. Like anything else, even in science and the archaeological fields, a lot of things can be boiled down to this was most likely used for this, because nobody's alive from those times to say, hey, this is what we use this for. And even so, the evidence that we do have that is like a real account from an Indigenous person, like we talk about the codices. And I don't know, this may be different from the brothers up here in the north, but down south, what we do have of the codices, the ones that are written from a native perspective, at the end of the day, you still had an overseer watching you as you painted and you did this work. So a lot of it can get lost in translation, like anything else. Simply speaking, you put out the possibility that someone's going to misunderstand you or mistranslate you, etc. So there's no such thing as something being or remaining completely pure. And so, because of how much was destroyed and the fact that history was written by the conqueror, we won't ever fully 100% know, like, this is fact, but a lot of it is speculation and consensus. So you will find Indigenous perspectives, they're just that, perspectives, like anything else. So there is no moving backward, we are only moving forward. So what do we do while still honoring the past? How can we honor the past and keep moving forward? That's what I would say there. Gatekeeping silences the voices and opinions of those who may have a different view within the culture and create a hostile and unwelcoming environment. Oftentimes this is tied to ego, because there is so much that is lost. Those that have knowledge use it to hold people hostage in a lot of ways. And for some people, that statement within itself may be a hard one to even acknowledge. But within, like, for example, within the Mexicayot, people that know things about Mexicayot hold it, or in danza, for me, I've joined some more open circles and some more closed ones, and where it was in the more closed ones, that where it was matriarchal and regimental in nature, it was really deeply steeped in Catholicism, and anything that you wanted to know that was more in line with the Mexicayot, you were either given derivative or very just like little bites of information. There was never really you can never really ask the deeper questions. And when you're on the search for this stuff, it's the people that do know, they almost, like, again, want to question you if you're worthy of knowing these things, but these things, we've already been plunged into silence, into darkness for 500 years. How many more years do we have to perpetuate this, right? And not to mention that some circles will tolerate abuse in order to keep the status quo, in order to keep their power, and people put up with it to stay in access to prayer or to stay in access to knowledge. And if you speak out, you get exiled. There's some really messed up stuff, guys, that happens within these circles. And it's not only me that knows these things. A lot of people know this stuff, and there's been some really heavy drama, when it comes to sexual harassment, sexual abusers. Okay. So I had to cut some of what I said because I don't want my video to get flagged. But my point is that there has been some really horrible stuff covered up for the sake of keeping appearances within these cultures that I myself have experienced. Next, gatekeeping undermines the authenticity and value of one's own Indigenous identity, making it dependent on external validation. We start to become really homogenized in that, where it's like, is this good enough? Am I good enough? Seeking validation. Is this correct enough? It's okay. You don't have to, like, that's the thing. It's like, you don't have to get it right. Nobody has it right. There's no such thing as a perfect human being. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to believe something for a while. Maybe you stumble upon some information that you read when you were, 8, and they teach you stuff about Indigenous cultures when you're 8, and you held that belief until you unlearn it. It's the same thing's going to happen. Give yourself the space. Give people the space to learn and unlearn at their own pace. It's not your responsibility. It's going to happen. All of this, that undermines authenticity, ignores the complexity and the fluidity of Indigenous identity and culture, and assumes that there's only one right or true way to be a part of the culture or of the community. The more you walk this path, the more you realize that it is more like swimming in a river where it branches off in infinite directions, taking you to different places, biospheres, different ways of being with the earth. No matter how you look at it, it's still the same river. All the rivers lead to the ocean of humanity and beings of the earth. You will find that there are many ways to be, not just one. So why shouldn't you be allowed to jump into that river and to learn and to go at your pace? Gatekeeping contradicts the spirit of learning and curiosity, and often motivates people to explore Indigenous heritage, and instead fosters a sense of superiority or entitlement among gatekeepers. They just feed themselves, and instead of just letting people be and learn, the people that are just learning, when you have a beginner's mindset, you actually bring the most innovation and new ideas and possibilities. You bring a new energy into the pot, that could potentially be stagnant, and if we don't let these things in, we don't know what the possibilities are and what we can create. The reality is that the Indigenous people of the Anáhuac never left. We weren't conquered. We're still here. The ingenuity of Indigenous people have given the world tremendous contributions, some of which we use daily, like the calendar, for example. If you're beginning to reconnect or are searching for your Indigenous ancestors, the last thing you need is to let the gatekeepers discourage you. Those that are from a lost tribe dig, learn, and open up to the possibilities. You do not need anyone's approval to explore. We were left with a beautiful artistic legacy for us to be inspired by. It'll never be like it was, and we have to release that. We have to let go. We often chase what's the most authentic, or what's the closest to the way our ancestors did it. And there's no such thing anymore, because even if we did, we live in the context of a different time. So it'll never be like it was. Our role is to find our own authenticity from the inspiration that was left for us. If you're bringing honor and love to something that was buried in the earth, displaced to the other side of the planet, or had attempts to be destroyed, you're loving it, isn't that not beautiful enough? I personally have come across a lot of these barriers, and I just want to put the point across to just let people explore themselves, let people be, let them love the things that they love and have their process. As long as it is all practiced respectfully and consciously, we can create harmony and share the ways of our ancestors, not only with our own people, those that are reconnecting, but also those from another tribe. We're a lot more alike than we are different. Let these branches of the river take you to the ocean and remind you to venerate our most loved ancestor, the earth, Tonancintlali, and our oldest ancestor, El Abuelo Fuego, Huehueteotl, Grandfather Fire. The last Huaytlatoani Cuauhtémoc, the last living Mexica Aztec emperor, left us a prophecy, a consigna, that although on the long and sad night the people had to destroy their own temples and their altars, that there would come a day where we would build them again with the coming of the new sun. And I believe that time is upon us. I hope that this has been a stimulating chat. I'm curious to hear about some of your own experiences in the comments. Let me know what kinds of barriers you've experienced on your journey, or if you're just beginning, let me know how you're going to approach this topic when it comes up for you. But sending you all lots of love, piloncillos, and I'll see you on the next time. Make sure if you like this to give it a like and to subscribe. Tas ka, Mateo,